Good evening. It's Monday the 4th of December and this is a meeting of Rother District Council's Audit and Standards Committee. I'm the Chair of the Committee, Councillor Brian Drayson. I would like to welcome everyone in the Chamber and online to the meeting. Before we start, I need to cover some housekeeping. Members in the Chamber, please remember to turn their microphones on by pressing the nearest button to them before speaking, and also remember to turn it off when they finish speaking. Also, please do not move the microphones. Those members joining remotely, I don't think we've got any members of the committee, but they're asked to please leave their cameras on during the meeting and use the hands up facility to indicate that they wish to speak. Tonight's meeting is in two parts. Part A is on standards matters, and we're joined in the Chamber by Lorna Ford, the Chief Executive of Rother District Council, Ben Hook, Director of Place and Climate Change, Joe Powell, Head of Service, Housing and Regeneration, Mr Patrick Farmer, our Independent Member on Audit, Rose Durbin and Bob Brown, Bob Brown, our Independent Members looking at standards. And introduce also Linda Walker, our new Monitoring Officer, to her first meeting tonight. Online, we have Duncan Ellis, our interim Chief Financial Officer, and we also have Councillor Vicky Cook, Leader of the Council, who is a ex officio member of the committee. Right. Can I have your permission, please, agenda item 1, to sign the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record? Thank you. Thank you. And item 2, apologies for absence.
There are none, Chair.
Thank you. 3, additional items.
No, there are none.
Thank you. And disclosures of interest from members, please. Councillor Thomas.
Chair of the Housing Company.
Thank you. Any others? Councillor Biggs.
Item 6.
Item 6. Thank you. You're asked to repeat those at the beginning of that particular item, please. Thank you. Right. Agenda. Sorry.
Sorry,
Sorry,
I wasn't sure if I had to disclose that I'm Sedlescombe District Councillor and Parish Councillor.
Oh, which councillor?
Sedlescombe.
Sedlescombe. Councillor Cooper. Sedlescombe.
And also on the Housing Company. Thank you.
And on the Housing Company. Anything else? Okay, thank you. Right, moving on to part A then, agenda item 5, which is Rother District Council owned accommodation complaints and tenants satisfaction report. Joe Powell is to introduce this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. I hope the report is fairly self-explanatory in terms of the statutory requirement on the council as a landlord, to survey its tenants. I can confirm that the survey itself is a statutory set of questions which we have to ask, so we don't get much choice, and they're quite dry, as you'll see from the report. But you know, fairly good rate of response and positive feedback, reflecting the proactive engagement we ensure we have with our tenants throughout their tenancy. So happy to take detailed questions.
Any questions? I'll just have one. How many properties are under this heading, please?
We have 36 presently, with some more due. Should be around 50 by March time next year.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Thomas.
Just simply to record, what a fantastic report. Did it 100% satisfaction rating. It's fabulous.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. For those who may be watching online, there were lots of nodding heads and applaud at that as well. So thank you. So this is for noting. Somebody to move noting it, please. Councillor Gray. Sorry.
I rather agree with Councillor Thomas. noting is perhaps too neutral a term. I think we should welcome this and congratulate the people concerned.
We had, but I'll ask Louise to include it in the minutes. Thank you, if everyone's agreeable to that. Thank you. So Councillor Gray moved noting it. Councillor Thomas seconded it. Noted? Yes, thank you. Agenda item 6, Code of Conduct Complaints, Monitoring and Other Standards Matters.
Do you want to declare an interest, Chair?
Yes, Councillor Biggs declares his interest. Linda Walker, our Interim Monitoring Officer.
Thank you, Chair. And it's a pleasure to be here to meet a few of you anyway tonight. It's my first visit to Bexhill-on-Sea. And obviously, here is the Interim Monitoring Officer. And it's certainly been quite an interesting few months since I joined the authority. And obviously I do a lot of my work remotely, but it is actually quite nice to be here and at least meet a few of you. So the first report that I'm presenting this evening is the regular 6-monthly report about the Code of Conduct complaints which have been received and processed. In the way that we normally provide them, they're anonymous and they're referred to by their case number, and the report sets out the various complaints and how they have been dealt with. There is also a more detailed report on regarding Northern Parish Council. An external expert was commissioned in order to carry out a sort of an assessment of some of the issues involving the parish council, and it's come up with, I think it was 41 recommendations as to how things could be improved. It's an ongoing process, and there is also a further report in the confidential part of the meeting that relates to this. As far as the work that I will be carrying out, I've had rather a lot of complaints, and obviously once they can all be dealt with, and get onto the work of actually trying to improve things and look at the processes that you have, and just looking at ways that things can actually be improved, both in the procedures that are actually used, and also perhaps some further training, so that we'll have less difficulties rather than having to deal with the ones that present themselves. So there will be some training that I will provide on various aspects of the Code of Conduct. I mean, obviously it's not involving you, although some of you who actually sit on parish councils, we have got the parish assembly tomorrow, and I will be doing some Code of Conduct training at that as well. So I think that's all that I really need to say about this report. As I say, it's largely the regular report that you receive.
Any questions for Linda? Right, so it's for noting again. Please, someone can move noting it. Councillor Gray, you're my go-to councillor tonight. And Councillor Thomas seconding it. Those in favour of noting the report? Yeah, thank you. Agenda item 7 on the dispensation policy. Linda Walker again.
Yeah, this is it. This is something again that I think needed to be tightened up. As you'll know, if councillors do have a disclosable pecuniary interest, obviously they can't take part in meetings. There are certain instances where it is important that a dispensation can be granted, and we've attached the policy for your information, but it also sets out when a dispensation can be granted, because obviously you can't be doing it all the time, but there are certain instances where decisions wouldn't be able to be made without a dispensation. So again, just to get things on a sort of an even keel, we're proposing that policy to you. It's fairly straightforward, and it's based on sort of guidance that we received from the LGA and other sources. So it's based on best practice.
Chairman, the sound is in and out at the moment. I hope that's not affecting the public transmission. It may just be this machine.
Perhaps one of the councillors listening remotely could put a message in the chat for us as to whether or not the sounds.
There's no chat.
Oh, there is no chat. Forget that. Okay, we'll hope it's. We've got another set of. Yeah,
it is very hard to hear, Brian.
That's the other way of doing it, of course. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just ask Linda to say something and see if that's any clearer.
Is this better? It's been moved a bit closer to me now.
Just going to change headsets for Councillor Barnes. All I was going to say, reading this, because we're off to recommend this policy for approval by full council, it strikes me that we should instantly then, in agenda item 4, that standing one about pecuniary advantages, we should pecuniary interest, we should add something like a must and any dispensations obtained, so that again at that agenda item, if you have got an interest, that's the point at which you also say you've got a dispensation. But apart from that, yes, Councillor Barnes.
Yes, on parish council agendas, we have a standing item where dispensations are actually talked about by the chairman. Usually there's nothing to say, but it's good to have the item on the agenda.
Yeah, thank you. I think it can be simply included within the interests. That's the time to make it. So I suppose I've sort of suggested an amendment. Anyone agree to that? Lots of nodding heads. And do we agree to this report and recommend it to full council for adoption, please? Can I have someone to move it, please? Councillor McGurk, Councillor Barnes, seconded. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. Right, it was all going so well. Agenda item 8. This is to exclude the press and public while we discuss agenda items 9 and 10. I've met with Linda Walker, the Monitoring Officer, and I have been reassured that the exempt information in both items 9 and 10 relates either to an individual or from which an individual is likely to be identified. Therefore, I'm happy to move this motion. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gray, and then I suppose it is open for discussion before we agree. I'm excluding all those in favour? All those against? Abstentions? Councillor Barnes, thank you. Right. So unusual on this part. So the 2 independent members on standards are remaining in the room. The independent person on audit has left. We're going to cease the stream. How long is a piece of string? I would think we won't be restarting the stream till at least 7:10. So we will give time for the stream to end, and then we'll start on agenda item 8. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome back, everyone, to the second part of this evening's Audit and Standards meeting, the audit part. Apologies to those who believed me when I said we'd be back at about 7:10. It's now 7:50, but it takes as long as it takes. We're joined for the part B by Mr. Patrick Farmer, our independent member for audit, Mr. Gary Angel, our audit manager, and Steve Akehurst, our senior auditor. And online we're joined by Duncan Wells and Raymond Deganio from Grant Thornton. What did I call you, Darren? Duncan, sorry. These glasses, I don't know whose they are. And Amy Fern, Rotherham District Council, in relation to the housing company. Right, so agenda item 11, Grant Thornton annual report for 22-23 is issued. Darren or Raymond? Darren, by the looks of it. Good evening, Darren.
Hello, Chair. Thank you. Good evening. Hope you can hear me okay. So I will just briefly say a few words to put the report into context, and then I'll happily pick up any questions that members may have. As in previous versions, we comment both positively and in those areas where we think there's opportunities for improvement across three themes: financial sustainability, governance, and economy efficiency and effectiveness. Pleasingly, we don't think there are any significant weaknesses in your arrangements, but we have made a number of recommendations across all three. Management responses to those recommendations are captured in the report before you. There's a lot of focus at the moment on councils struggling financially, and we analyse your financial position. And whilst we don't think there are significant weaknesses, it's clear, like many others, there's a financial challenge that you're grappling with. Your medium-term financial plan does highlight the financial pressure. So over the period of that financial plan, there's a funding gap of just under 4 million. You have plans in place to address that. You have your protection of discretionary services program, and you're developing your financial services, your service review program, so you're not entirely reliant on the first initiative. But what's clear is that whilst you have some financial flexibility, given the level of your reserves, you don't have a great deal of financial flexibility, and you have a pretty weak track record over the last couple of years of delivering annual savings, and therefore there is a risk without improving that track record of delivering savings that your need to draw on reserves reduces what flexibility you do have. So there's a gathering pressure there for you. And I know that I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but it's just to highlight that we acknowledge that financial pressure and the need to respond to it promptly. For governance, we considered risk management, internal audits work, the Local Government Association peer review, and capital monitoring and reporting, specifically in respect of the Town Hall Renaissance project and the Blackfriars scheme. Again, there were no significant weakness, but there are a number of improvement recommendations, particularly in respect of capital monitoring. On the 3 E's, in addition to the broad arrangements that we assessed, we considered the Council's response to the increasing homelessness challenge and your housing company. Our understanding on the former is set out at pages 86, and our thinking and conclusions around the housing company are set out at pages 87 to 89. And again, we make a number of improvement recommendations. I think it's 3 in total, 2 of which are against those 2 topics. I will pause there, and I'm happy to pick up any questions that members may have.
Councillor Barnes.
I'm not quite sure where one begins. So perhaps we better break this down into chunks. But I am a little concerned. We are told in various of your reports that there is always a danger where management overrides certain procedures. I find, and I ask you the question direct, when did you become aware that on the Spine Road project, reports had not been made to Cabinet and that Bailey Garner had been hired outside the procurement rules? Did you become aware?
Through you, Chair, we became aware as we looked at it through this piece of work. And we set out the reasons why we looked at it. We were conscious of a number of questions that have been aired at committee meetings by members, and that caused us just to look at that a bit closer.
I would have said that we're beginning to verge there on a significant weakness. I'd be interested to hear your defence of it not being a significant weakness, because it was impossible, as far as I can see, for this committee, or indeed the Cabinet, to know what was going on. And clearly the Cabinet were not aware that the procurement rules had been breached, and the reporting rules that are in financial regulations clearly have been breached. We'll come on to the internal audit report later, but it does seem to me we're really on the edge of saying that actually should not have happened. So how do we find out that it has happened if in fact those breaches have taken place?
Through you, Chair. So I don't disagree that in this instance it was a judgment call and it was on the cusp. I think as part of our summary in the report, I'm just trying to find the reference, I think it's on page 81 of the papers, we do say there was not adequate transparency in 22-23 in respect of the Blackfriars project, but did note the improved reporting in 23-24. The first report of that, I think, was in the July 23 report.
Yes, it's helpful that procedures have greatly improved. Though I have to say, I should probably come back to this later, I learned from these reports that Bailey Garner are no longer in our employ, and we have a new managing agent. I cannot find out where that was reported to Cabinet or to this committee.
Judging by the looks, that was a very good question. Mr. Hook.
The information in relation to Bailey Garner was provided in the, I believe it was in the confidential appendix that went with the July Cabinet report. I'll have to double check that, but it was certainly mentioned heavily in the members' briefing that was provided preceding that on the Blackfriars project as well. So I think it was in the confidential papers that went to the Cabinet member, the Cabinet in July, but it was definitely in the member briefing that was.
I will check again. I thought we had taken some action in regard to Breheny rather than Bailey Garner, so I obviously misunderstood the position. I have to say I think it's a good decision, but nevertheless, it worries me, but we'll come back to that on Blackfriars, how much really has gone on without us all being aware of the full impact of the overrun. And I realise the money has not yet been spent, but we are obligated to deliver that spine road, or we forfeit the grant, and that has its own consequences. So I want to chase that later. The second thing I really wanted to chase is it seemed to me the auditors are doing us less than justice on homelessness. This is a demand-led service. Therefore, it's almost impossible to do more than mitigate it. You can never hope, I think, to solve the problem. The recommendations that we have from the auditors seem to be sensible, but it does seem to me we deserve a little more credit than we've got for the huge capital investment we've made, which has produced already 36 properties, will produce 50, and it does seem to me that as a result of that, when compared to other authorities in our immediate area, we are actually in a much more robust position. I think the figure is, even at the current level, we're still in single figures in terms of the proportion of our budget, whereas some authorities are spending a third or more of their money on homelessness. And it seems to me that deserves some better recognition from the auditors than we're getting, because it seems to me there we have taken a very prudent line, and one which is going to pay dividends over the years to come. If we hadn't, we would be down on our 5 million level almost immediately.
I think Mr. Wells was agreeing with you there. Darren.
The question is, are you generous enough? You sound in places, there are bits where you do recognise that, but there are bits where you sound a bit critical. And it seems to me that we identified the problem, we took action, and as a result, we're in a much more robust state. And I would have thought that actually tells to our credit. And I think auditors should reckon where we've done well as where we've done badly.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'm sorry that our view of how well we thought or how positive we thought the Council's response and that hasn't come through clearly enough in the report. It was certainly our intention based on what we saw and understood, and as you say, compared to the position that other authorities, particularly one of your neighbours. Yes, we think that you have responded appropriately. You've put the right response in place to tackle the issue. And as you quite rightly say, it is very much a demand-led service, and you can only seek to mitigate it. It can never, and certainly in this current environment, unfortunately, be completely eradicated. But by the nature of the one improvement recommendation that we did raise in respect of homelessness, I would have hoped that gave a sense of the encouraging positive view that we had of the authorities' stance and response.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Wells on the 2022-23? No? Oh, sorry. Mr. Farmer. No, I just didn't see your hand.
That's all right. A couple of issues, really. On page 67, you comment on the under-delivery of savings, which is very significant. And I wonder if it's your view that this committee should spend more of its effort and time on reviewing things like progress on savings, considering how important that is to meeting our budgets in the future.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Chair. So I don't know whether it's this committee that needs to spend more time on savings. I think our principal concern was that there was an awful lot of a reliance on the one programme, and there needed to be a diversification of approach to achieving savings to avoid continued annual reliance on reserves. I think and challenging financial environment now and going forward, and your limited room for flexibility, I think prudently a refocus on assessing the robustness of savings and the ongoing delivery of planned savings can only help. It can only ensure that there are no surprises. So I guess I've answered your question in a long-winded way, and that's yes, a renewed focus by this committee and by Cabinet on the delivery of savings, in our view, would be sensible.
Thank you, and you may have detected he just said first question, so here's number 2.
I've only got 2, Brian, so you'll be pleased to know. On page 84, you point out the issue of significant overspends on particularly capital budgets in occasions. And I'm just wondering again, very often audit committees spend their time looking and exploring where there are significant variances to a budgeted item and try and learn lessons and give advice back to those managing such projects. Again, do you think this committee should spend more of its time on investigating significant variances in budgeted items?
Thank you. And again, through you, Chair. I think one of our recommendations is about improving the transparency and detail of capital reporting and monitoring. So that's one level. And the second level, I think we've also made a recommendation that for specific projects, perhaps those that are determined as riskier or large in value or are considered complex, there may also be separate enhanced reporting around those projects. And that would be very much for members to decide some criteria in which to identify such projects. So I think there is scope there to improve the information provided to members, which would naturally allow better focus, scrutiny and challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
Chairman, I really want to move on to comment rather than questioning of Darren. Is that appropriate at this moment?
Yes, there was nobody else with their hands up.
In which case, Chairman, it seems to me there are a number of recommendations from previous years that haven't been taken forward. And I think we do need to recognise that and give some backing to our external auditors. So I think rather as we do with internal audit recommendations that haven't been followed up, I think at some reasonable stage we should ask what has happened to the auditor's recommendations. Probably convenient to take the 2 years together, now we have them all. But I think a progress report on recommendations would be very useful indeed. The 2 areas in this report which really, well, there are 3 that leapt out at me. One is almost taken for granted on page 66, but I think is going to be a significant problem for us because we're clearly having difficulties in recruitment. Pay inflation is identified on page 66 as something we are tending to underestimate, and I think there are other good reasons for worrying about that. The capital programme is clearly really insufficiently monitored. And I don't know, I think probably we need at some stage Duncan, when he brings forward probably his first report on a halted project, not a stalled one, possibly we could have a broader look at how we monitor the capital programme, because we are benefiting at the moment from slippage, which is actually helping boost our reserves and keeping us well above the 5 million level. I note, incidentally, that our external auditors think the 5 million is the minimum, and they would prefer us to be between that and a slightly higher figure. Clearly, that slippage, unless we dispose of quite a lot of the capital programme by not taking it forward, is going to come back and hit us. So I have to say it's an illusory saving in the sense that it simply defers the problem for a year unless we take some pretty radical action on the capital programme. So that's the second thing really I identified. I don't know what you want to do about page 81, because that identifies where I think officers, no doubt for good reasons, but I would want to understand the reasons, haven't actually fully reported on what's been going on. And sometimes, yes, we may not know the full consequences, but if the consequences are in 3 figures, in 6 figures, let alone in 7, I think even if we don't know the final figure, we ought to be alerted in the risk register and some attention paid to should that risk be modified. And when I look back, and I'm grateful to our internal audit team, a number of risks have not actually been altered, although the risks have grown quite significantly. In the case of Blackfriars, by 7-figure sum, and quite a large 7-figure sum. And yet, I struggle to find how this committee actually would find that out other than by word of mouth, because we've had no formal report on that. Now that has changed since Lorna arrived, and I'm grateful to Lorna because I think we've gripped a lot of things that were not good, but it still seems to me on the capital programme, which is a very significant risk to this organisation, and on the Spine Road, we really do need to have separate reports. And I think that is in the recommendations of our external auditors. But I want to see those recommendations taken forward as a matter of very high priority.
Thank you, Councillor. Lorna.
Your point around the outstanding audit actions, I absolutely accept that we need some focus on those. And you'll recall that at a previous meeting we spoke about our Fit for the Future programme. Now, of course, this is for a different financial year, and we have taken forward some of that work. And next year, I really want to turn those ambers into greens. And we're going to remain very, very focused on that and making sure that our internal audit actions, our external audit actions, all come together into an action plan that we can monitor at senior leadership team, and we can make sure that we're making progress on these items. In terms of the capital programme, we are at the moment, we have somebody working with us looking at our capital projects, and really that piece of work is going to be absolutely crucial in working out what we take forward and what we pause into the future, and we need to be making sure that we can support those decisions going forward. The risk register, I think, is something that has really changed quite a lot in the way that we approach it. It's certainly a dynamic tool now that we are using and looking at on a regular basis to make sure that new risks are being seen on our corporate risk register. And there are a few recommendations in the housing governance report that we've got coming up that we start to look at that, not at senior leadership team, but at our statutory officer group, which is the three roles that I mentioned, is monitoring officer, section 151, the head of paid service, that we're looking at some of these recommendations and considering how we then take them forward. So really using all the tools in our box to make sure that we've got some rigour around the implementation of these recommendations. I have no way answered all of your questions or your points, Councillor Barnes. I'm really, really sorry. But I think that hopefully that's reassured you that we recognise that actually the way that we've dealt with these recommendations in the past, to see them rolling forward year on year is something that we've got to stop, and we've got to make sure that we're on top of them, and everyone is playing their part. If you've been identified as an owner of one of these recommendations, that we're held accountable and we make it all happen. So, yeah, I'm sorry. There's probably lots of other questions.
I think really, and obviously we can't take them all at one meeting, I would say the top two are the capital programme and Blackfriars. The way the auditors worded their report, it's not clear to me whether Blackfriars is one of the halted projects or not. So that I would welcome knowing whether it is being reviewed. I suspect the Spine Road can't be reviewed because otherwise we will increase our level of risk totally. And of course, necessarily, until the Spine Road is virtually complete, not entirely, the housing is held up. And that so far has cost us dear. I have to say, one of the problems with Bailey Garner's bad management of Brehony and the problems that weren't identified soon enough is that it put the housing programme into a very different economic climate. And really the housing company has paid a heavy price for what really is the ineptitude of our contractor. Sorry, what I meant to say, Chairman, is I think those two reports are urgent. Then perhaps we can look at the other recommendations in batches at future meetings.
Yes, indeed. We were discussing earlier about the recommendation. I mean, if you think about the internal audit, we did start looking at the old ones, and there's now only 4 old ones left. And just shining a light seems to get some stuff happening. So we will follow up somehow the recommendations for the external auditors. I mean, you keep seeing like partially implemented, and that's from 2 years ago. Well, let's get and look at it. They're there for a reason. Did you want to come in, Mr. Hook? Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. It was only to reassure members that a full and detailed review of the capital programme is being undertaken. We've brought in an external person to help us do that with the right qualifications and experience, Lloyd Exley, who's working with Joe, and to help over, sort of look through particularly the development part of our capital programme and provide advice on all of our projects. To what degree Blackfriars is included in that, I'm not 100% sure, because obviously it's a different level, it's a different stage in its development than the ability to say we're not going to progress with this beyond a certain point, because we are into a construction phase and we are committed to a contract. So, but we'll utilise his expertise and advice at every stage for all of the projects, including Blackfriars, and hope to bring a report forward in the near future on projects that need to progress, projects that need to be halted, and projects that need to be effectively lost.
I presume that report is initially for Cabinet.
Yes, I would imagine it would probably go that route rather than this.
Thank you. Any more comments, observations, questions on agenda item, where are we? 11. No, good. I'll quit while I'm going ahead. This is for noting, presumably. Have someone to move it, please. Councillor Gray, well done. Councillor Bart, oh, sorry.
Chairman, we ought to be a bit stronger than noting. There are recommendations here, most of which, in fact, I can't find one I really disagree with. There are some I might have phrased slightly differently. But we really ought to endorse those recommendations and ask that they be acted upon and reported upon. And I think it should be both the Cabinet and ourselves. The Cabinet need it for taking executive decisions. We need it to make sure that the right decisions have been taken and that they fulfil our duty to look after both regularity and efficiency.
Yeah, I take your point about noting, because we note the recommendations, but we're not then actually saying what we've just said, which is we've got to follow them up and do something about them. So I'm not sure how we word that, except what you said, a word that clicked into my brain about endorse. That's it, endorse. Yes, okay. So the wording of your motion is that we note that we've got and endorse the recommendations contained therein.
That we endorse the recommendations and ask for reports on how they're being taken forward, with priority being given to whatever the recommendations are about Blackfriars and the capital programme. I'll leave it to...
Luckily, Louise has written down exactly what you just said.
Yeah. And I think that actually conveys our sentiments better than noting.
No, I think you're right there, because we have said, we said the other day about trying to do something about these recommendations, which will put a smile on Darren's face when we actually deliver on some of his recommendations. Did you get that? Yes, thank you. So, moved by Councillor Barnes, seconded by me, I suppose. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried. Right, agenda item 12, the audit findings report for 21-22. Darren, is it you again, or is it Raymond?
I'll start, Chair, but if there are any difficult questions, then I'll invite Raymond in to answer. Excuse me. So, a lot of this report members have seen before. Where we've updated it, we've just highlighted it in underlined text for ease of identification. There are two principal updates. One is in respect of the pension liability, and that's where new information was available that accurately reported and reflected the position as at the 31st of March 22. The financial statements have been updated in light of new information, and that's reported at page 114 of your papers. The second key change is in respect of the outstanding audit queries we raised and had with officers for valuation of land, specifically Mount View Street and Blackfriars, and the outcome for those two land elements are reported on page 115, and the detail of the extent of the change is shown on page 131 and 132. For the rest, I'll let the report speak for itself, but I'm happy to pick up any questions that members may have.
Thank you. Any questions? No questions. One for you, Duncan, if I can, just before Darren goes. I've made a scribbled note on my copy for... I've got delegation to you and I to sign off the changes. Is that the changes that Darren's just been talking about?
Thank you, Chair. It is, but you'll note the next item on the agenda is actual formal sign-off by committee. We did have a delegation, but having discussed it with Darren, because he felt it necessary to bring this report forward to committee, we thought we would formalise it with the next item.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with me. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with me before the meeting, Duncan. Thank you. Right, so item 12 to note the report of the audit findings. Councillor Gray looks like she's proposing it. I'll second it. All those in favour? Thank you. Having agreed that, there shouldn't be a problem with agenda item 13, which is the official sign-off of that. Duncan.
Nothing further to add, Chair, just to regularise the report that Darren's just brought forward so we can formally sign off, which will be a positive position to get those agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. So the motion is that we resolve that the Council's 2021-2022 statement accounts be approved. Proposed by Councillor Barnes, seconded by Councillor Thomas. All those in favour? Thank you. That is carried. Agenda item 14, the internal audit report to the 30th of September. Mr. Angel.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. This report updates members on the current position against the audit plan, the internal activity in the second quarter of 2023-24, progress made on implementing outstanding audit recommendations, and a quick note on how the audit's planned in quarter 4. The current position on the audit against the audit plan is we're a little bit behind schedule at present, but with the exception of one audit which we've had to drop, I think we had to deliver all the rest of it by the 31st of March. Summary of the audit activity in quarter 2. We issued 3 reports in the second quarter of 2023-24. The executive summaries are reproduced in Appendix A as per usual, and that's page 52 onwards. The reports this time were the ICT asset management, Blackfriars Spine Road project, and housing company governance. Now, all 3 of these reports received negative assurance ratings owing to the seriousness of the issues identified. 2 of these only provided minimal assurance, meaning that urgent improvements in controls or in the application of the controls are required. The reasons for these assessments and the main issues found are outlined in the executive summaries. All high-risk recommendations are also reported in full in the appendix. I'm sure that you will have some questions about these reports given the nature of the audit findings. However, management have kindly provided progress updates on all 3 reports, which I've included in the blue section at the end of each executive summary. Hopefully their comments will give you some assurance that they are taking the audit findings seriously and have already made progress to address the many issues reported on. Before I move on, I'd just like to emphasise that, in case it isn't clear, the housing company governance audit was wholly focused on the governance arrangements in place to protect Rotherham District Council's interest as sole shareholder. The report findings are not, and should not be taken to be, a verdict on the performance of the housing company. Page 150, we've got the implementation of the audit recommendations. I've done my usual draw round to see where we are on those. The progress on the outstanding audit recommendations that is shown in Appendix B. It's on 174, page 174. There are currently 15 recommendations in the old years section. 5 of these have been reported previously, and in paragraph 8, I've included a little progress update on those cases for members. As for the current year cases, there's only been 4 recommendations made in the first quarter, and half of these have already been resolved. And finally, the audits planned for next quarter. As requested at last meeting, I've included a list of the audits scheduled to take place in quarter 4. I think I'll hand it over to questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, just before I open the questions, I wanted to get to the two ones that you're all probably dying to ask questions on first. So with paragraph 8, the procurement one is most definitely, it's our problem, but the fault is not lying with us, and that's still waiting for somebody else to put their act into order. The others are all progressing. And if I turn to, I don't want to stop questions on the ICT, but it was identified mainly as a backlog issue, and the update shows that there's been progress on that. But by all means, if anyone wants questions on the ICT asset management, by all means. But there's the other two that are probably going to take up more of our time. So I'll open it up to questions. And in fact, Mr. Akehurst is here as the senior auditor who did most of the audit. Any questions? No. If there's no ICT, we'll go to the Blackfriars Spine Road project. Any questions on that? Mr. Farmer.
I'd like to address the issue of responding to Homes England in terms of a plan, which I gather from the actions on page 162, I think, that a plan has been drawn up and submitted. But the second element is whether or not the 31st of March 24 date for completion of the final drawdown, which I presume means you have to have completed the Spine Road or a certain element of it. Just to give some background, when I asked these questions, in a previous life I was the programme manager for a major military programme for GEC Marconi, and I'm very familiar with project management, with critical path analysis, and with how you keep these programmes on time. We used to have to report to the Navy and the MOD every 2 weeks on the programme. That's how it was watched. And it occurs to me that you need that level of focus in terms of identifying the critical path, particularly when you're managing external contractors. It ought to be being reviewed on a weekly basis and then being held to account on those critical milestones that will determine whether you meet it. Now, I obviously don't know what level of monitoring you've got, but unless you've got that sort of level of monitoring, you have very little chance of meeting that date.
Is that one for you, Amy?
Thank you, Councillor Drayson. Yes, I can confirm we do. I'm the programme manager for the Blackfriars scheme on both the Spine Road and the housing company. We do have a project manager working on the Blackfriars Spine Road. He reports weekly to the corporate projects team, and I'm included in that meeting. And he also completes monthly highlight reports through to the infrastructure team, which is also sent to senior management. And I also report at a programme level as well. So we have improved the reporting of the Spine Road. I do accept that there has been a lot of slippage on this project. I'm sure you'll appreciate some of the background on this, that the scheme did have to progress at pace in order to keep up with the HIF funding milestones, and that required a tender to go out that didn't have quite the level of detail needed on the road, on major design aspects of the road, and that is ultimately what's been the main reason for some of the delays that are still happening at the moment. But we're on track to complete the road next year, and the housing scheme is also on target to start on site later next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Councillor Biggs.
Hi, just to follow up on the Homes England thing. Obviously, the date is March 2024, and it says in the report there's a possibility, if that's not completed by then, there's a possibility that grant could be withdrawn. If it is, where does the 8.7 million, do you get that from now?
So we're currently undertaking a deed of variation with Homes England. They've given us reassurance that all of the money that we've claimed for thus far is now in consideration. So I think we've received just over £3.5 million. We've got another £1.2 million of that grant to come forward as per the claims that have been made. We have been given reassurance from Homes England that money spent in good faith is not going to be, they're not going to seek to reclaim that. We obviously aren't working on that basis. We're working on the basis of getting the road delivered, getting that money spent through. So we have, and we continue to talk to them about other funding opportunities that may or may not be available. I think in terms of the existing secured funding, as I say, we've got a deed of variation in with them at the moment. They are considering that, and it's going through their legal process just to make sure that the timescales are aligned. And as soon as that's signed off, we can continue to draw down more funding. But we will have drawn down, I think, about 4.8 million, something like that, by the end of the latest round.
Yeah, but the question I was asking was, if for any reason you don't meet that criteria, have you got a contingency plan? Where would the money come from? It's all ifs and buts at the moment, isn't it? They've assured you, they have assured before we've had stuff assured about the housing company. All I'm asking is, if they did, and it says in the report there's a possibility, have we got a contingency plan where we get that money from to complete the project?
The answer is no, but then we'd have to consider whether or not we can continue works on the ground at that point, because obviously at the moment we're working on the basis of receiving receiving that funding through Homes England. If at any point that changes, then we'd have to take a review of the project at that point and see how we could mitigate any losses that the council might make. At the moment, we can only go on the basis that Homes England are encouraging us to continue this process. They've given us reassurances that the deed of variation and the timescales that we're presenting to them are acceptable, and that we're just going through a legal process to get that solidified, and we can make those claims by the end of the financial year.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I think it may well be by now the position has changed quite considerably, but I have to say page 162 troubled me. Presumably our new action plan was completed, went in within the 5 days stipulated, because it worried me when I read that Homes England had issued a reservation of rights letter. Now, this is probably now all history, but I think it's quite important that we are reassured that the action plan is in. Has it been approved by Homes England? When do we expect to get confirmation that the grant is secure? Because otherwise we are faced with potentially quite a big risk.
Thank you. Amy, I'll come to you on that one.
Thank you, Councillor Drayson. Councillor Barnes. Yes, I can confirm the action plan was in on time. Just to reassure members, we did update, and we have been in regular contact with Homes England since the previous to July on the need for an extension. It's just that it was recognised that we shouldn't submit a formal request to change the milestones until we had some certainty on the programme, and that was why it was formalised through that action plan in August. But it's all been submitted and the extended milestones have been agreed in principle, as Ben outlined. It's just subject to that final deed of variation, which is now working its way through. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Any other questions? Oh, Councillor Barnes.
Yes, it's difficult to know which page is the one to turn to. But if I look at page 163, this one highlights something which really does deeply trouble me. When we looked at the audit of the capital programme last year, capital programme overspends were to be reported in accordance with the financial procedure rules. Management accepted that recommendation. However, the overspend on this project hasn't been reported because its extent was uncertain. But when you're dealing with a huge sum, we're now up to, I think the latest figure that I've seen is probably getting on for 80% increase in the cost. And I'm not sure we've yet got a final figure. Now, I know that some of that has not yet been spent, and therefore, to that extent, even at this late stage, if the grant were pulled, we presumably are not committed to spend all that money. But nevertheless, that is a huge and significant overspend. And I really cannot accept that management felt that the reporting of overspend in this particular project needed to be accurate and credible before being formally reported. That is a fudge of the worst order. I'm sorry, I cannot accept that.
No, I share that, because even an overspend of £1 should have been reported. So if you don't know how big it is, but you know it's going to be an overspend, you should be warning somebody and letting somebody know. Duncan, have you got anything to say on that? Only because I see your name at the bottom of the page.
Yes, thank you, Chair. No, that action has been allocated to me. I brought forward a couple of reports now in July and November, because when I started with the authority, it became apparent that if we were to continue with that scheme, then we needed to be reflecting a different budget figure within the capital programme. I was aware of the previous audit report on the capital side of things, so I have tried to introduce a number of improvements with the team on the capital monitoring that sort of links back into what Darren was talking about earlier in terms of some of those improvements, and bringing forward separate reports on Blackfriars is part of that. One of Darren's recommendations was that we have more focus on individual schemes rather than putting them in something like the budget monitoring. So there's been a couple of reports that have come forward. There's been a couple of member presentations that officers have done as well. Like I say, my view was that we needed to increase that capital budget. There was an argument that we could have stopped. The budget hadn't been exceeded, but if the budget was to progress, there was information that suggested that budget wouldn't be sufficient. So the reporting over the last few months has been put in place to try and regularise that position, and that will be the report to Cabinet in November was requesting the additional budget. And the decision finally on that will be made by full council on the 18th, Chair.
Thank you, Duncan. Mr. Farmer.
I find it strange that this committee didn't certainly get any answers to overspends for many, many months, yet I managed to read it in the paper. Why is it that the local newspapers seem to be well aware of an overspend on the Spine Road when this committee didn't?
I think we'll have to leave that one as rhetorical. Okay. Good point, though, but then lots of things appear in newspapers that I didn't know that. Councillor Barnes, were you going to?
Yes, I'm grateful to Duncan, who has really given us much more information than we've ever had before. What is a really significant risk to our budget. What worries me, and I think there is a lesson to be learnt, and I'll take a small example. We are now told that we hired a management firm to manage this for us because we didn't have in-house capacity. We lost a project manager, very competent one in my view. We lost him on promotion at Brighton. Somebody else went sick, so there was a vacancy, and really a lot went wrong, I think, probably as a result of that. So I can understand why Bailey Garner were brought in, but the contract was not in accordance with our procurement rules. surely somebody should have reported that, and it probably the Section 151 officer, because that actually is a real problem for me. How is this to be prevented from recurring again? I have to say, when you look at the contract with Bailey Garner, they seem to have managed to reduce their own supervision of Brehony without telling us that they had reduced their supervision of Brehony, which means that contract was pretty inept. There seems also to be some uncertainty of which type of contract it was. So all of that is a mess. Now, I'm not in a way worried about allocating blame. I understand there was a difficult situation at the time. But why was that not called out at the time by the relevant officer? And how are we to prevent that sort of mess recurring again without our attention being drawn to it? And that seems to me a real question for the Section 151, current Section 151 officer.
Before I come to Mr. Hook.
I just wanted to clarify the role that Bailey Garner played. They were the quantity surveyor on the project, not the project manager. So they've been on board since they were on board since day one, as well as the project manager. You're right. We lost 2 in-house project managers in the space of about 4 weeks, which caused us a significant project management issue over that period of time. That's right, but they had since been replaced. And it was only upon their replacement that then the real problems started to emerge with Bailey Garner in terms of that relationship and their oversight of the contract. So I just wanted to clarify, they weren't the project manager, they were the quantity surveyor, and we had project managers who oversaw that. But their professional advice and support was critical in terms of the decision-making process throughout that. And therefore, that's, I think we've detailed some in previous reports as well. But I just wanted to clarify that their role was not a project management role, it was a quantity surveyor role.
That's helpful, but it doesn't really answer my question.
No, I was just coming to Mr. Ellis. He's had time to look it up. How did we, the collective we, not know?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's difficult for me to comment on a position that occurred a couple of years ago when I wasn't at the authority. I suppose what I'm able to do is to make sure in the future that we try and ensure there are controls in place to try and mitigate against any of this. So there are a number of things we've introduced and implemented. So we have an online contracts register now that was separately monitored and managed by ourselves outside of the hub. So the hub are now managing that on our behalf to make sure that everything is going through that contracts register, which is part of our transparency agenda. So it's important we have all of those things online so people can access them, so people can see them. But getting the hub involved means that everything they're involved with should be on that register and they're aware of the things that are coming forward. So we now have the procurement hub officers on site several days a week with us, which is a big improvement to how it was previously. The hub have done training for managers because part of it is about education. Part of it is about training officers to ensure that they understand the legal framework, they understand our contract standing orders, because they are 2 different things. We can have a set of internal regulations that talks about thresholds and when we need to tender and how we need to go about it. We've got an exemption process, but then you've got the old EU law, which is now UK law. So they're doing some more training in terms of that new UK law. We're expecting that all to be finalised early next year. So the training will encompass all the updates to the contract standing orders. But ultimately, it does come down to monitoring and awareness so that officers are operating within the bounds and the remits of the public procurement law, but also those contract standing orders. And there are some massively different thresholds when you look at procurement. So contracts for works, for example, the threshold for those is around 4.6 million, whereas for things like goods and services, it's far lower at 170,000. And more recently, they've complicated a bit by bringing VAT into the equation, which doesn't particularly help. So in my view, it's about working with the procurement hub, making sure the training is in place, making sure that we're working with internal audit, because again, when I first started, we had a not particularly good audit report on capital, we similarly had an audit report on procurement that raised a number of issues. So one of the other things I've tried to do is to try and improve those processes as well. I'm not saying everything at the moment is perfect, but that's the thing. As an organisation, we should continually develop, we should continually learn, we should continually improve, and that's an ongoing thing these days. You can't sit back and rest on your laurels and think everything's okay. You need to make sure that that engagement's going on. You need to make sure that training is going on, and also that the decision making is at the right place, and those people are empowered to make those decisions. So there are things that I've tried to put in place to improve things and to make sure these things don't happen again, but I can't go back a couple of years and undo anything that possibly happened then.
Thank you. Mr. Angel.
Thank you, Chair. My colleagues just looked up some working papers from the Blackfriars audit, and it would appear that Bailey Garner was awarded on a framework agreement, so there wouldn't have been a need to have a tendering exercise.
Yeah, what the question just poses is, does that disagree with the external audit? Is there a... No. Mr. Akehurst.
Yeah, just to clarify, this was an audit we did before this current audit of Blackfriars. We did some preliminary work regarding the Breeny contract and the Bailey Garner contract. So this was before any work had actually started on site. But the Bailey Garner contract was procured under a framework agreement with South East Consortium. I've checked. We checked at the time the OSU number, so it would have been taken from EU procurement rules at that particular time, and it was a 5-year agreement. I apologise, I didn't have a chance to read the external audit report, so if they've actually mentioned that, my findings from 3 years ago differ. So I just thought I to put that on record.
It's on record, and I think Mr. Hook will be having a look some stage.
Yeah, I think I would want a report on that, please.
Would it be Mr. Hook or Mr. Ellis?
On the procurement bit,
yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, I was surprised when Councillor Barnes made it. I hadn't mentioned it. I hadn't read that in that part of the external auditor's report. So I was surprised to hear that it wasn't compliant, but maybe it's something that we need to look into. I think, as Steve said, if it was a framework employment, but there might be some nuances that have occurred throughout the contract that may have made that non-compliant as far as the external auditor is concerned. We'll have to review it and come back to you on it, if that's okay.
Thank you. Councillor Biggs.
Thank you, Chair. This is for Duncan, really. We're both new to this Blackfriars project. I'm looking page 166, the loan arrangement, where the council are loaning the housing company money.
Hang on a moment, we're just going to finish. Are there any more questions on Spine Road? Right, okay. It's 7 minutes to 9. We've got the housing audit, company audit, and the work, whatever, I can't remember the other word, schedule, programme. Are we happy to continue past 9 o'clock? Sorry, we're on to 9:30. Sorry. Right, you've got 35 minutes. Go. We're now on the... Yes.
Yes, sorry. It's just a matter of the loan agreement, page 166. I'm quite astonished that the council are loaning money out where there's no working capital agreement, no separate loan agreement, and we're not getting paid any interest on our loan. I know that it's supposed to be done in December, the working capital agreement. Is that a definite? And why has it taken till March 2024 to put the service loan agreement in place?
Duncan, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, they were the pieces of work when I started that hadn't progressed for a number of years. So I did a report, an update to SLT in terms of things like the budget, things like the loan agreement, things like the service level agreement, and made an undertaking to try and get those in place, because in my position as your 151 officer, having lent several £1 million to the housing company already without any agreements in place was a risk. So I've been working very closely with Amy and several other officers and with both of the legal teams. So we have Bevan Britton supporting us as an authority and Trowers that support the housing company. And between us, we've been trying to progress those agreements. It's complicated given the position that we're in and trying to regularise them. And that's one of the reasons why the report talks about 2 separate agreements. So if we went back 2 or 3 years and had the loan agreement in place, that would have sorted everything out. When I spoke to the solicitors about how we regularise it and move forward as quickly as possible, their advice was that we create this working capital agreement first to regularise the money that had been lent to date and the forecasts for the end of the year. And then off the back of that, they would, and in tandem, create the loan agreement. So effectively, the working capital agreement will become part of the loan agreement, but they were of the view that the working capital agreement could be delivered much more quickly. So I've been trying to progress those. The initial discussions suggested that we would be able to have that working capital agreement finalised in the summer. That hasn't been the case. But I know Amy's on the call, I know Councillor Thomas is in the room, I know Joe is there, and there have been various iterations of that agreement going between the solicitors. Can I absolutely, hand on heart, guarantee it will definitely be done by the end of December? No. It's taken a long time to get where we are. I would want it to be done by then, but we've only got 3 weeks of this this calendar year, work year left. So I'm doing the best I can to try and get those things over the line, having been absent for a number of years. And similarly with the SLA, there was a report from a number of years ago that had a draft high-level SLA as an appendix, but no one had done anything with it since that time. So I've tried to get that regularised. The Housing Board, and Councillor Thomas will correct me if I'm wrong, I think the board have signed off the SLA now, and we're now in the final stages where it needs signing off by the authority and Councillor Thomas on behalf of the housing company. So again, that piece of work has been completed, but I would agree that those things should have been done several years ago, but they haven't been. So I'm trying to get them regularised now.
Thank you. Just one other question. The interest on the loan that's being paid, is that backdated?
Through you, Chair. Yes, we're making a provision each year for the interest that would have been paid. So yes.
Thank you, Duncan.
Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I think there are some serious questions around this. This is the issue which I resigned as Vice Chairman of the company. Because I was, put it frankly, fed to the back teeth that as a company we had no capital and no prospect of capital. I'll come back to that. No SLA. Our Chief Operating Officer had always been cross-pressured because as officers of the Council they had a great deal else on their agenda. I felt from the very beginning that the company needed a chief operating officer who was in the employ of the company. But the SLA would at least have guaranteed us time. I still find it incredible that somebody as busy as our housing officer, we don't know how much time she should be spending on council business and how much on company business. The site itself, and I'm not sure how much I should say about this, but the site has not yet been transferred, and yet we had a contract with a housing company to build. That, it seems to me, a very questionable position to have got ourselves into. But there's a much more fundamental question behind this, and that is the original idea of setting up the housing company, and I chaired the task force that made the recommendation, was in fact to increase the rate of house building in Rother. When the council's business plan, it was never the company's business plan, when the council's business plan came forward, it said stalled sites were the task of the new company. That is not actually part of what the Housing Task Force had recommended. Blackfriars, which everybody knew was a poison chalice, was handed over to the company to do first. It was never worked out, and still hasn't been worked out to mutual satisfaction, as I understand, though the chairman of the company must speak for himself, why all the costs of bringing the site up to a marketable level should somehow be recovered at the expense of a company which is wholly dependent at the moment on loan finance. Every project which might have realised a profit and therefore given the company some capital of its own has been removed from the company. The only one they're still tasked with is Blackfriars. How is the company ever to build up genuine independence of the council, begin to build its own capital, if forever we are going to treat the costs of bringing sterile sites up to scratch and then pile that bid on to the company through an overage agreement? We have got to find an accounting treatment which says, if our purpose as a council is to actually bring certain sites forward that otherwise would not be developed, then that accounting treatment should have that as part of a regeneration budget and not part of an overage agreement with the company. Otherwise, the company remains a lame duck. There is valuable work it could be doing with small builders who are frequently handicapped by a lack of capital. And there are many small sites across the High Weald that actually could be brought productively forward, help solve our housing problem. But there's no capital within the company which allows them to do that. The only joint projects that have ever been envisaged have been stamped on by the shareholder. And so far from the company being a genuinely independent entity operating to the benefit of Rother, and indeed indirectly of this council, because the more houses we have, the more council tax we have actually hobbled the company from successful operation. And I really think we need to face up to what is the role of the company, how are we to free it up to do what we intended it to do, and how we handle our regeneration work on stalled sites. Blackfriars, we are now told, on the latest valuation, is now valued at a plus sign of, presumably on the assumption that all the infrastructure is completed, it's now valued at about £595,000. But the infrastructure is costing about 19.5. and we are trying to recover a substantial slice of that by agreement with the company, which will leave them actually in toils and prevent them from doing any effective work. And I think we do need a serious discussion of our whole relationship with the company, which is not just about governance, it's about accounting treatment, it's about how we actually are going to use that company to Rother's benefit, instead of somehow passing over a stalled site which we all knew was going to be only made operational at a huge capital loss. Didn't need to be as much as 19.5 million, I have to say, but leave that on one side. We knew that because we went for a Homes England capital grant. As it is now, the only way we can deliver this project, and hopefully this will change, is without a single affordable house, in breach of our planning policy, and that has yet to go through the planning committee. And the whole saga has taken years, and nobody has put the back into getting the legal agreements in place or really thinking through what the relationship would be. And frankly, I was glad to resign, and I speak out now again and say this is a disaster in the making, and we've made it.
I'm going to say I don't disagree with the word you said then, but Councillor Thomas...
Can I just say that as Chair, it is not your job to say as you agree with the members of the committee. You are here to be an impartial Chair. Okay. And it's a really important point before I even begin, okay? Because it's not good to have a statement of that kind made with the authority of the Chair when we have an extremely controversial statement made.
I'll do a statement of interest.
And before you have heard my attempt at a rebuttal.
I'll declare an interest that I was also a former director of the company.
That is correct, but you're also the Chair of this committee. So Well, now that was not something I was expecting to face, but when we were together on the housing company, Councillor Barnes and I actually agreed on virtually everything, did we not? And there are some things that he said tonight with which I actually agree. Let me just make that quite clear. We're not completely on opposite sides.
No, I wouldn't expect you to.
But nevertheless, you will not be surprised that my view is not the same as his. My view is that the housing company, and this may surprise members of this committee, that the housing company, in my opinion, is in a better state than it's ever been since its formation. And that is the view of the people who work for the company as well as my own. I'd like to say that very, very strongly indeed.
I agree.
And one of the reasons for that, I would say, and I hope I can find a way of saying this, it's a bit difficult really, because on the one hand, as the chair of the housing company, it's my job to represent the interests of that company. But at the same time, part of the interest of the company is to have a firm partnership with the council. And those two things can produce some conflicts of interest, but they can also produce an identity of interest. And it's important that I navigate that particular difficulty. But I think I want to start by saying that one of the reasons why I have that confidence is because I have enormous confidence in two key people. The first is Duncan Ellis, as financial director, and the second is Lorna Thorpe as the chief executive. And because of those two people, and I have to say, we've had consistent support from other officers behind the scenes as well, whom I won't name, but you know who they are. We've had consistent and good support from officers, and I'd particularly like to pay tribute to Amy Thurn, who is an absolute wonder at the job she does. Because of those two people, things that we know have been stalled for years are now coming forward. And I'm sure, Gary, that your report on the housing company, which within in 6 months' time, might have been very different from the one you delivered today. Because anybody reading that report would see that there are a whole host of things that have taken years to come to fruition, and now they are all on the cusp of being signed and agreed. So the first thing I want to say about why the company, second thing, that's because we have personnel who are backing the company, who are at the same time scrutinising the company. They're not just saying, yes, do what you like. They're scrutinising it carefully, and we have a system of scrutiny involving the shareholders committee, which now looks at the company, and to which we report regularly. So that's another reason why I think things are basically sound. And I think we've got a very good idea of where we are financially. That's something we have not had such a good idea of up to now, but we are beginning to get a clear sense of the financing of this project, and we're getting a clearer sense of the financing of the Spine Road as well. By roughly March or April of this year, we hope to be in a position to produce a definitive view of the costs of the housing and the costs of the Spine Road, and that will be reported properly, obviously, to all members of this committee and to the Council as a whole. So that's another reason why I feel that things are basically sound. I also have great confidence in our Chief Operating Officer, Neil Tickle, who is one of the most respected housing professionals in this area. I have confidence in the Board of Governors. I'm very pleased to have somebody here, Beverly Cooper, as one of my fellow councillors, a very valuable member of the committee. But we've also got 2 professional housing experts on the committee. And that means there's a greater range of expertise available to the company in its deliberations. So that's a further reason to being positive about the company. Some of the issues that you raised, Councillor Barnes, I agree with you on. I'm going to mention 1 or 2. The first is that I agree with you that, let's face it, when it comes to the company, would we have started with Blackfriars if we had an option? The answer is, of course, we wouldn't, because we were given this hugely difficult project to begin with, okay? And I've said before, you look at that and you think, goodness, here is a place to install a ski slope. You do not think to yourself, here's a place to have a housing development, okay? So we have been landed with this, okay? And we're also landed with the idea that we had to develop all the stalled sites. Now, if that was ever viable, it's not viable anymore, because those stalled sites were stalled for a reason. They were financially dubious, and with the changes that have taken place in the economy, they're now financially disadvantageous. And so the company has to look, and in its new business plan, it will be looking at other opportunities. It will be looking to see if it can find commercially viable sites. It will be looking to see if it can partner, as you've mentioned, with builders, particularly local builders. It will be looking for smaller scale developments, perhaps within what used to be called the AONB, and I believe they're called national landscapes. Within that area, we'll be looking for projects on a kind of small scale, partnering with other builders, and projects that are essentially viable. I don't want to say much about this because there's one we're looking at this very moment. We are looking at a particular project at this particular moment, but we're examining it extremely carefully to see whether it's viable or not. And so the idea is that we won't move further until we know we've got a good proposition to put to people. Okay? So that's another reason why I think the future of the company is going to be very bright. And I think when we think about it, 84% of councils have got some kind of housing company. And there's a reason for that. There are 3 main reasons. Firstly, because housing companies do not have to follow procurement rules. And this is totally key. It makes housing companies more flexible, more adaptable, quicker to react. Altogether, more companies which are more adapted to the very difficult conditions, difficult market conditions we have today. Okay? So that's the first reason. The second reason is that housing companies are allowed to make a profit, and councils are not. And the third reason is because housing companies are able to offer different kinds of tenure in a way in which councils are not. So there are 3 good reasons to having a housing company. And if we do have a change of government, which we might, maybe not, there's talk about all councils having some form of basically housing company, largely developed social housing. And so you will already have a mechanism, if that is the way in which things go, which could be adapted to that purpose and might be able to continue some of the existing purposes as well. Because there is a good argument, I think, for delivering some market homes in order to subsidise the other homes. So I think that's possibly something about the future of the company. So I'm not sure I've covered all the points that I wrote down when you were speaking, Councillor Barnes, but I've tried to cover the majority of them. Just very quickly going back to your point about the loan, it's a complicated situation. Basically, I'm not here depending upon information I've been given by the invaluable Amy Thurn. Basically, we don't have currently a loan agreement, that is perfectly true, but Finance have already drafted and issued a WCA to regularise the borrowing to date and dealing with the funding requirements up to March the 24th, up to 10 million, and then authority to proceed was approved at the July Cabinet. So there is some official democratic approval for that. And so far as the loan facility is concerned, there was, way back on the 6th of September 2021, an £80 million agreement to support the delivery of Alliance homes doing the 1,000 houses, and that was approved all the way back there. And so basically, what we're doing, we're working towards a situation where the budget for the infrastructure project will become available, the budget for the housing project will become available, and approved delegations will be in place to bring that forward. And we hope to keep everybody updated on how we're getting on in all these ways. And so I conclude as I began by saying that basically the company has been in a very difficult position. It's been a very difficult position for all kinds of reasons. It was landed with a remit that was far from optimal, okay? And during its existence, it has been constantly reviewing, revising, and improving that remit. And I think as a consequence, it will be on course to deliver its promise of building 200 homes in Battle, which will be environmentally sound and which I think will be the beginning of a new chapter in the delivery of housing in this area. So that is why I say, in conclusion, I think the housing company is better than it's ever been, and it deserves to support every single person in this room and every single person in the council and every single person in the district.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. At risk of compounding my previous offence, there's nothing there that you said that I don't disagree with. Or is it odds with Councillor Barnes? Because he was talking about historically. You're talking about now, and you have painted a wonderful picture. And I want to thank you, because I was a former director, for your work on this. Because nothing you've said disagrees with, is at odds with him, because it's in safe hands. And I know that the people you've mentioned, Lorna and Duncan and Amy, are working wonders with you. So, at risk of compounding my offence, I actually don't disagree with anything you said either.
I have to say I agreed with virtually everything that Councillor Thomas said. The central issue, which we still need to face up to, is if we are going to bring stalled sites forward, how are we going to handle them in accounting terms? Because clearly they are stalled for very good viability reasons. It's right in regeneration terms that we use them for housing, because for heaven knows, we have not got that much land available for housing in Rother. 90% of our land surface is protected in one way or another. So we have to build on the 10%. So finding sites, even ones that cannot actually be made viable by a commercial developer, is important to us. And there is a long-term benefit in council tax revenue, which everybody never takes into account at all. And we have a housing problem, and we have a huge gap between affordability of housing and the actual levels of income, particularly wage levels, in this part of the world. So all the reasons for having a housing company and an independent one are good, but we can't go on hobbling the company with all the costs of regenerating those stalled sites. And that's the issue which hangs between Councillor Thomas and myself. I don't think he would disagree with what I've said, but if he does, he must say so.
I'll come to Mr. Hooker. I was just going to say, I would have thought the question of how you deal with stalled sites is one for the company that then comes back to the shareholder saying we're actually stuck on this particular site, because that's an operational decision with the stall. But just to remind you, there is a call for sites still out at the moment with the new local plan, and hopefully there'll be some shakeout from that the company could see that. So, Mr. Ben, get out of the cupboard. Mr Hook first, and then Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, obviously conscious that this is this item is about how we as the council monitor the housing company. I think Councillor Thomas, in his sort of comment, actually pointed out the answer to your question, Councillor Barnes, which is actually that's down to the business plan of the housing company. So we recognise, I think, now as a council that the housing company's initial business plan was a council agenda that was sort of given to the housing company. When you look at the list of sites that was included in that, most of those are being progressed by the council in some way, or have other intentions for them, or have fallen away, with the exception, obviously, of the Blackfriars site, which is an active partnership. I think in terms of the housing company's way forward, it's for them to determine that, how they seek to progress, and then to come to the council with that proposition through their business case, which can then go through a proper scrutiny process and be be agreed upon by either the shareholders' representative or through the shareholder as full council. And I think that process is the right way. And I think that then aligns with that sort of independence of the housing company, which is it's now in a position where it needs to be making its own decisions about the future, and making proposals to the council as the shareholder as to how it should proceed. Obviously, the council may take a different view, and the council as shareholder would remain to reserve the right to do that. But I think it's for the company to make those presentations rather than for the council to dictate the other way around. So hopefully, in the presentation of the new business case, that will be forthcoming.
I think Councillor Thomas was just going to speak first. Councillor Barnes, then to you.
Simply to say, first of all, I'm very pleased to see the outbreak of unanimity. Part of my misspent youth was being exposed to Gilbert and Sullivan, and hence the song "I am right and you were right and everything is quite correct." That's just by the way. But non-Gilbert and Sullivan people think, what on earth is he talking about? But can I just say that one of the points that Mr. Angel raised actually was that he was concerned about the independence of the company and how things said by the council could compromise that independence. And so one of the issues he actually raised, you explicitly raised this business, didn't you, about stalled sites. And there is a risk that if those kinds of things are said by the council, that it might be seen by an exterior person as compromising the independence of the council. But just to say very quickly that the housing company is not entirely happy with, we're not totally opposed to it, but not entirely happy with the idea of this being raised as a risk in itself, partly because we are afraid that raising the risk will increase the risk. And we were hoping that you will feel that because of the detailed discussions that have taken place between Showers, on the one hand, for the company, and Bath and Britain for the council, and the going backwards and forwards between them, trying to remove that risk, that you would consider, and this must be a matter of private discussion rather than public pronouncements, whether you would consider removing the request of that risk. But that, as I say, would be a matter of private discussion. Thank you.
Quick one. Going, yeah, good.
Chairman.
Yes.
Yes, but it's our duty to ask the awkward question. If the company is not going to bring forward the stall sites, then we're going to have an awful lot of sites that we could use for building that are not going to be built upon. And there are areas that we allocated in our last sites allocation plan that for one reason or another have not been brought forward by commercial companies. Some of those we could no doubt facilitate if we had a structure that allowed us to do so. I think this is a proper question. I don't want to answer tonight. I am raising a problem which seems to me very germane to an authority that has so little building land within its confines.
Thank you. Come to Mr. Hook on that one.
Sense my anxiety about wanting to. No.
I think you're not going to get one.
I think it's just worth reminding that we are bringing forward a housing development strategy for the councils. That's a council's housing development strategy that will address how we, as a council, look to to tackle stalled sites, both in our ownership and others. And I think that will be subject to an overview and scrutiny task and finish group, which will then help develop up that strategy going forward. And I think that's being led by Amy. Is that right? Or no, Graham. Sorry, Graham Cornell, isn't it? And yourself, Joe.
Yeah, that's being led by myself, with support of Graham Cornell, to establish a range of options for increasing the development of affordable housing across the county, across the district rather, including the housing company.
Ben, am I right in saying there's already a subcommittee for that, isn't there?
There is,
yeah, because the overview, Paul asked for members to go on it, didn't he?
That's right, task and finish group. Yeah, it should be in January, should be its initial meeting,
okay,
I think.
Thank you.
Right, there being no other questions, and it's 9:25. This is resolved that the internal audit report to the 30th of September be noted. I think John, myself and Louise will be going over the minutes to see that we've reflected the conversations that took part, although we'll miss out any criticism of me by Councillor Thomas. Can someone propose noting that, please? Councillor Gray, well done. And I'll second it. All those in favour of noting the audit report, thank you. And I will say, because I'm very remiss and Councillor Barnes will tell me off, I want to thank Mr Akehurst and Gary, but particularly Mr Akehurst, because Gary's just riding on your coattails, for the work you did on this. Thank you very much. Right, last agenda item, 15, the work programme. So the first one we've done today, there's February the 24th, it's now, 2024, it's the 28th. It's an extraordinary meeting to go through the standard reports that were left off tonight because of the full agenda we had tonight, and another speaking part for Mr Wells, I think. And then going on to March, I won't go past that. We've got the audit reports coming up. We've got more, the current internal audits and more. So I think that will be it. I'm just checking I'll make sure for next time that we've definitely got marked up the things we wanted to come back. I can't spot it at the moment. But there were some things we wanted definitely to come back, wasn't it?
I think the two issues, and I think I'm very happy to leave it to you, Chairman, to work out how they best fit into the programme, but I do think we want an update on the Blackfriars infrastructure. And again, obviously we need the work to be done, but really we should be beginning to look at the first of the capital reports and how we handle the reporting on capital reports. This could be taken as a model of how that is going to be done, and at the same time we could look at that in some detail. So those really ought to fit into the first half of next year somehow. Yeah. But I'll leave it to you, Chairman, to work out where the pressure is least, and therefore they are best taken.
Yes, thank you. I'll find the thing I was thinking about. It was something else we did in a previous meeting. But there being no other business, anyone get 2 hours and 55 minutes in the sweep? This meeting is now closed. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance. Good night.